Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I begin by acknowledging the Indigenous people that walked and worked upon this land for many generations before we arrived, who told their stories and learned from their stories. And I acknowledge their elders, both past and present. I also want to express my respect and acknowledgement for my own parents and those that came before. And in thinking of family, I'm also mindful of my daughter, who is just about to go into the early stages of labour and bring us our third mokopuna. So at this time I think of family as well. I think that we can't see as far forward as we would like to be able to see, but we can only see as far as we can because we stand on the shoulders of those who came before. I'd like to acknowledge the colleagues that I've worked with over many projects. I'll be referring to a few different things as I go through the next 40 minutes or so. And there's a number of colleagues that I've worked with. The names are in the references, but I want to acknowledge that a lot of the work that I've been involved in has been collaborative work, and it wouldn't be possible without those people. And I also particularly wanted to just mention in introduction the many adult learners that I've worked with over the years, because it's the adult learners that I've worked with that have taught me how to teach them. And just before we do get underway too, and Nikki will probably be annoyed with me for saying this, but I do want to publicly thank my team at the National Centre and our colleagues from Awanui-Arangi, who have done such a fantastic job in pulling this event together over the past 2 days. And I know Nikki will say a little bit more at the end, but I particularly wanted to thank Nikki and the team because my sense is that it's been a very positive 2 days, and I'm very proud to be associated with them. Thank you. I'm going to jump into this. I've got a series of slides to work through. I hope it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. The problem with accepting to be the keynote speaker on the final session of a 2-day event is that some people might have wished that they'd taken flight earlier, or perhaps taken the earlier flight, as the case may be. But what I'd like to do over the next little while is share with you some stories. There will be probably 2 versions of this presentation. There'll be a version which captures the slides, and there'll be a version which is really a PDF file. And the PDF file is a reasonably well-developed text which will carry a lot of the things that I'll gloss over as we jump through. So if people are particularly interested, you'll be able to get access to that material later on. I wanted to start off by just saying a few words about storytelling. I think of research as a form of storytelling. And we don't always think of research as telling stories, and sometimes research reports are not particularly interesting stories, and sometimes researchers lose sight of the fact that in fact that they are really storytellers. But I was mindful of this movie. It's an Australian film that came out a few years ago now by a marvellous director. And in this film, I don't know whether you can read that bit at the top. Can you say 10 canoes, 3 wives, 150 spears, trouble? It's a fun movie, and it's set in Arnhem Land in the Northern Territory, looking at these Aboriginal communities. But one of the things that I found really fascinating about this movie was that the director plays with the idea of storytelling. And at one point during the movie, the narrator, or the voice of the movie, who's a well-known Australian actor, Aboriginal actor called David Galpalil, the narrator says his story's gone into a big old story now, like a big old tree. And this story has many branches. And I'm fascinated with the idea that stories have other stories inside them, and that there are branches to the story, and sometimes the different branches don't always get told. And I suppose my research career has I've been attracted to those stories that don't get told, you know, the branches that don't always get explored. The other thing about storytelling and research is that sometimes the research fails to reflect the richness and the complexity of the work. I have a colleague, an Australian colleague at the University of South Australia, a fellow called Peter+, and he talks about adult education researchers doing research, and he says they squeeze the juice out of the lived experience. And then the report that they present is a dry, desiccated kind of account, you know? And anybody who was really there could tell you that it wasn't really like that. It's not that the truth, hasn't been told. It's not that the research report is kind of wrong. It's just that it doesn't really reflect the richness and the complexity of the lived experience. And so I'm quite interested in research that tries to leave the juices in. Instead of squeezing the juice out, I'm rather more interested in the juice, So, hence the reference to telling stories in the beginning. The other introductory kind of comment was that Nicola McCartney said to me, if you do the final presentation, you do the final keynote, Peter, that'll be really good because you can sort of pull it all together and make sense of it all. And I thought, well, that would be fantastic if somebody could stand up at the end of 2 days after all of these presentations and somehow pull it all together and make sense of it all. The problem is that making sense is actually really quite a personal kind of business, isn't it? It turns out that making sense is not really something that someone else can do for you. It turns out that it's something that you have to do for yourself. And I was reminded of that process just recently reading this novel. Can I get an indication? How many people are familiar with the writing of Jean Auel? Yeah? For those of you that haven't discovered her, I'd recommend her. I think she's a wonderful writer. And this novel is the last of a series which began with a book called The Clan of the Cave Bear. In this particular novel, Ayla, who's the principal character in this series of novels, spends an entire year studying the rise and fall, or the rise and the setting of the sun and the moon. And every day for an entire year, she very carefully records precisely the place on the horizon where the sun rises and where the sun sets, and the place where the moon rises and the moon sets. And this is part of her process of literally reading and writing the world. What Freire talks about, yeah? And in this process, she discovers the significance of the summer long day and the winter short day. And of course, we've just passed the winter solstice, haven't we? Just a few days ago. Mm-hmm. And I was just reading this recently, and it really struck a chord for me because the winter solstice is a particularly significant time of year for me. Quite a number of years back, I wrote in my journal this little extract. Now, I've never actually shared this extract with a group like this, and I'm not quite sure why I wrote it. But maybe all those years ago, I wrote it for today. I thought of my 14-year-old daughter's reaction to her grandmother's death. That's my mother. Emma was just a baby when the melanoma was diagnosed. Emma is the same daughter, incidentally, that's just about to deliver granddaughter. I sat in my study with my journal and looked out the window, and the sky was thick with heavy thunderclouds, and it was almost dark, and it was only 4:30 in the afternoon. Why did she die so close to the winter solstice? The winter solstice has new meaning for me now, and it will carry this meaning for the rest of my life. I thought of the reaction of family and friends, my sister laughing and crying at the same time, claiming she was allowed to because she's the baby of the family. She was 34 at the time. Why was it that my wife had not been able to work on the patchwork quilt she was making for Mum, the one in the shape of a star? How much did it matter that it wasn't finished? What did it mean that Mum and Dad's young friends, their close neighbours, had a baby born to them on the night Mum died? A baby born just minutes after Mum died. What did that mean? What of my father, who had nursed Mum through amputations and crisis and trauma over all these years? Was it his love of the old windjammers and the romance of the sea that made me think of tides and the ebb and flow of life? I imagine some of you may relate to my confusion and grief. The fact that we knew it was going to happen didn't make it any easier in the end. She was too young. Some of her grandchildren never had the chance to know her. To the end, she never complained. She never had a bitter word. She used the very last ounces of energy that she had to give away smiles from her deathbed to family and friends. How do you understand? How do you understand such grace and courage? I don't know how you understand that. I don't know how you make sense of that. For me, it made sense in Winter Stars. And Winter Stars was written to the winter short day. Winter Stars was addressed to the winter solstice. Winter solstice, you bring heavy skies to close down the shortest day and stretch out the longest night. You seem minder to death and darkness. Yet, however steely, blue, grey, tough and cold you might pretend to be, you do not fool me. Your time is short. From this week onward, days are longer. Light and life grow stronger. You may claim the prize you carry off, but already love the trickster has made a mockery of you, bringing gorgeous new life in soft pink murmurings, and so love multiplies. You break strong hearts with malignant malice. Sadly, you do not know that such hearts are filled with love, and the agony of heartbreak releases sunbursts which give warmth and strength to the embrace of family and friends. And tear-streaked cheeks still smile. Laughter will wriggle through, unexpected. Oh, you are a cruel fool, but as for the prey you thought you'd claim, she is no more yours than a ship which sails out upon the tide. She rides upon your back to speed her journey, and she steers her course to the stars. That's a bit heavy, isn't it? Was that fair? Why put something like that in a literacy conference? Well, in the end, you have to make the judgment about whether that was legitimate or relevant or useful.